And again, the title is Prophets, Principles, and National Survival by Gerald L. Newquist. There's been different comments that have made all throughout from the beginning. In fact, if you want to get into some earlier conference, address the citations from that, check out Dwayne S. Crowther's Prophecy, Key to the Future.
I'm currently reading that right now.
Take a look at the part where he talks about the Constitution hanging by a thread.
Oh, definitely. Definitely.
Now, and then you'll get some earlier citations from the earlier general authorities going back into the 1800s. There's another, and this one, start page 279. The United States Constitution will hang by the by a thread, and that's Appendix I or 1. Now, there's another book that's by Gerald L. Lund. It's called The Coming of the Lord. It gets into citing prophecies about the Constitution hanging by a thread and the threats of an international secret combination that would seek to destroy the Constitution. The Book of Mormon, 1830, that was one of the earliest books in the church, warns over and over again about an international secret combination which would arise, and warns against that.
What about the stand passed by the Constitution by J.W.
I'd like to first backtrack a little bit to give you a little bit of historical background into how that the Illuminati, the Masonry rituals tie in with early to later Christendom, so that we can see what some of the rituals that were later perverted and used by the Illuminati and others, how it all ties in together. In ancient Christianity, the idea of how that Christ goes throughout the entire earth as a militant King of Kings is an important thing to consider here. Christ, in early to later Christian writings, is one who goes throughout the entire earth to preach the gospel, to establish his kingdom throughout the entire earth. While at the same time, there's a rival king who seeks to maintain his kingdom, his different establishments throughout the earth. He is the fallen angel, the angel that fell from heaven, who fought against Michael and his angels during the war in heaven. This is a common theme that you find in early to later Christian artworks and writings, is this idea about a battle that took place before the world began, a battle between the sons of and daughters of God in heaven and 1/3 of the other sons and daughters of God. There was a battle in the heavens. Book of Enoch talks about this sort of thing, the writings of Enoch, Jewish writings. But numerous early to later Christian artworks show this very thing too. Well, Satan was thrust out of heaven, and as the book of Enoch declares and points out, started to set up secret societies on the earth. He taught the children of men how to use narcotics. Fallen angels did, according to the book of Enoch. He and his angels showed how the children of men how to use weapons of war, set up secret societies, and perform secret oaths, and counterfeit the true mysteries of God. See, the prophets from the beginning knew that Christ would come down from heaven into the earth to be the one to perform the atonement, to take upon himself the sins of the world. And so, knowing this, the fallen angels counterfeited all the things, the mysteries and the types and the symbolisms that apply to Christ and point towards Christ. And they did this all throughout the centuries. This is what the early Christians said, and when in response to the early anti-Christians, they said, look, your mysteries, your rituals are very similar to what the pagans are doing. the early Christians would say, what has happened here, and the reason why there's similarities is this. The fallen angels had heard the true prophets of God speaking about Christ and his life, his resurrection, and his mysteries in the different nations where they were at, and thus they taught these things unto people who counterfeited the true mysteries. Therefore, as these things fell away into times of apostasy during different dispensations, these things filtered down through the centuries, and thus this is what you pagans have inherited from your forefathers, is an apostate version of the true mysteries. We have the true mysteries because they have been restored by Christ. This is what these early Christians talk about in the Nicene Father series and the post-Nicene Father series and anti-Nicene Father series, which date back before the Nicene Creed controversy. The Nicene and post-Nicene Fathers series is early Christian writings that date after the Nicene Creed era of 325. Irenaeus, Tertullian, Origen, and a number of early Christian writers argue that Christ had went to other nations of the earth, and that he had spoken to the prophets of old and had given them all of the prophetic types of his coming, and that when the fallen angels had heard these things, heard the true prophets, they counterfeited these things. Just Smart mentions this in his apology to the Roman Emperor. So this is what I'm saying. This is the polemical argument that you got to understand was taking place. Now, in early Latter Christendom, these Christians of these early centuries had the mysteries or ordinances that centered around Christ's wounds and centered around his death, his resurrection, his crucifixion. And so there's these symbolical types of all these things that you see in their rituals, which they called mysteries. In later centuries they were called it was called the Mass, it was called liturgies, and these things, a lot of these things center around the wounds of Christ. An excellent book to consider is Kelly's book, The Devil at Baptism. Another book, The Anastasis by Anna Carsonis, and John B. Lundy's book, Monumental Christianity. In these books and in the innumerable artworks and writings is very clear picture as to what the different scattered branches of Christendom had in their mysteries. Now, this is basically how what we see in the early to later Christian artworks, and stone monuments and grave markings and hand clasping rings of marriage, illumination manuscripts is this. We see how that the wandering Christ goes throughout the entire earth, and the trademark of him being a wanderer is for him to, when he appears to different people, is to show the people different gestures which show up in symbolical sacramental gestures in the masses and in the liturgies of later Christendom, because it centers around Christ's wounds again. But also he greets different ones with symbolical hand claps. This is what you see in the different artworks of Christ appearing as a pilgrim, Christ as a beggar. Fra Angelico, for example, depicts Christ as a pilgrim during the 14th century. Numerous other artworks show Christ appearing as a pilgrim. Now, the monks would greet Christ, or this is who they believed was Christ, as he was traveling about the earth in the different guises. See, they, according to Matthew 25 and St. Benedict's rule, believed that those who come to them, like the sick, beggars, travelers, nobles, and different ones, were all to be greeted as if they were the wandering Christ. So they would greet these pilgrims and different ones with different types of hand clasps, which they called the kiss of peace.